Okay, good. We have quorum. So we're going to call the meeting to order of the Information Technology and General Services Committee for Tuesday, December 12th. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. Sorry for a bit of a late start. So do we have any general public comment cards, or is this the...
Just one.
Just the one. Okay, so we will go ahead and take general public comment. Brian Barajas? Oh, yes.
When he's done, you want to close.
Hello?
Hi, Brian. You have 1 minute.
This is just a general statement. For people who don't know what the hell happened, I'll just briefly say this, that the United States government under Trump is facilitating a trade agreement which actually will consider this, that it'll affect even the states of the United States. And what I'm saying is that focus yourselves, if you're not referring to your staff members of what just took place on Donald Trump's trip to China, where he facilitated the $250 billion treaty agreements, memorandum of understanding. West Virginia, that's been plagued by drug overdoses, opioids, and probably the third state, which is the worst. Just consider yourselves lucky if you consider the fact that we can enter into these trade agreements to uplift humanity as a whole.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and close general public comment. Did we have any multiple item cards?
None.
Okay, so then let's go ahead and, colleagues, if there are no objections, I'd like to take items 3 and 4 on consent. Okay, so we will approve those items. And let's go ahead and go to item number 1.
Good afternoon, John White, City Clerk. Item 1, City Attorney Report, an ordinance adding Chapter 172 to Division 5 of the LA Ad Code to create the Economic Development Trust Fund for the receipt and disbursement of 50% of all monies in economic development projects or programs that are received by the city from the sale of lease of city-owned property.
Miguel Dagger, Deputy City Attorney, and
Sam Hughes, Economic Workforce Development.
and I think the title, it pretty much says it all. We're creating a trust fund for when we sell a property for economic development purposes, unless the properties otherwise, if we're unable to deposit the money, say, properties that were purchased with other trust funds or from other funds that we have to repay, or federal funds that we have to repay, half the money is intended to go in there and half the money into the general fund. And I think the ordinance also amends the council district trust funds to broaden the power for the expenditures in those funds to allow for other economic development type of expenditures.
Okay. Colleagues, did you have any questions?
I did.
Okay, Mr. Blumenfeld.
Great. What type of properties qualify for economic development? Is there a limit to the property that's sold in terms of the surplus property versus a property that's being sold for economic development?
Yeah, I think we've taken the position that we're separating the two. You have surplus property that the city has no use for, and that we sell at bidding, and other properties where there's been a determination that the city still has a use for this piece of property, such as the recent examples are like the Honda dealership, that piece of property on Washington, the property on Jefferson for the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf headquarters. We're also going to make that determination for Angels Landing. That's a CRA option property. So the council's making a finding. Yes, we do have a use for this property, so we're not going to have to go through the surplus property procedure. That use is an economic development use for the city. Clear blight, create jobs, increase the tax revenue, provide shopping, provide open space, whatever the case may be. So that's really...
Does that mean it's property that's being sold to a specific user for a specific purpose?
Generally it would be, yes. Because
as opposed to something that's put on as an open... Like we have a surplus in my district right now, a little piece of property, and we're just putting it up as surplus, highest bidder. That would not qualify.
That would not qualify. And if that sale, once it's sold, the proceeds would be distributed 50% to your real property trust fund and 50% to the general fund. if we found that, I don't know the piece of property, but if someone was going to be able to build a little manufacturing plant on that piece of property, or Google wanted to move their headquarters there, then, we could designate as economic development, and we would enter into negotiations, we'd enter in an MOU with whomever the developer is, and that the council would make the declaration that this is a economic development property. They would make that finding, and they would direct the proceeds to be distributed.
And then does that change the price of the land?
No, under the ordinance, all the properties we've sold have gone at fair market value, under the appraised value. Under the ordinance, how it was written, because originally this ordinance was directed to try to capture some of the powers that the CRA had, and when they had this concept of fair reuse, essentially you take the fair market value, and if there's things that the city is requiring, i.e. like say affordable housing, that will take some of the value out of that property, we would do an assessment of that property, what it's worth at the highest and best use, what it's worth minus whatever we are required that they wouldn't otherwise have had to do. So we get a reduced value, we'd be able to sell that to them at the reuse price, if that's.
So it is a way to sell it for a lower price, potentially.
We just haven't had any occasion where, like, we had a car dealership and that was the highest and best use. We had the coffee bean thing that was a manufacturing jobs creation, that was the highest and best use. But if they wanted to have a piece of property and you wanted to do a community service center or something like that, or something that where we're really taking out the value, then we could take that into consideration in doing our evaluation of the value of that property. It would still be the fair market value, it's just with our restrictions.
Right. Different than an auction value or something.
Yeah. So
And then, is there an impact on the general fund?
when we sell properties,
I mean,
not really, because
estimated for this change.
well, either way, half the money goes to the general fund. I mean, if you guys decide that you want to put some general fund money into a project, then obviously that would be an impact. But just on this is basically just setting up the bank account. We're opening the bank account and say this is how certain properties will, the money will be distributed.
How the previous general fund money would be distributed.
No, I think actually the previous council district surplus property money would be, because I think 50% of the money still goes into the general fund, and now 50% will go into this trust fund rather than 50% going into the council district surplus property trust fund.
Oh, I see. So I had it backwards in my mind. I apologize for that. I thought it was taking the city portion. You're taking the councilmanic portion that would have gone into the council-directed fund,
Right.
and you're putting it into a general fund that could be used anywhere in the city.
No. Basically, 50% of the money is going to go into the general fund regardless. And the other, if it's surplus piece of property, city has no use for this money, it's going to the council district surplus property fund, whatever district it's in, and that's under 5.500 of the ad code or something like that. We've made a determination these are not surplus properties, so these do not fall into that distribution. The city, if they were surplus, then we'd have to auction it off at the highest bidder, and there's other steps they'd have to take. It'd have to go through GSD. These properties go through Economic Workforce Development Department, where they find a developer and say, we're going to create jobs, we're going to do whatever we're going to do that's going to help. And we need this piece of property. The city has a real use for this piece of property by doing X, Y, and Z. Let's say, okay, that's a valid public purpose. So we could sell it for that public purpose, and we could, I don't want to say avoid, it's not subject to the surplus property. And I guess once we create this fund, the determination you're making is that though that money, half that money is going to go into this fund, and technically, once you make that determination, if you didn't have this fund, this property would not be surplus at all, and the money still wouldn't go into the council district fund, but it really depends on how you define surplus property into the council district trust fund, because they have their own definition for surplus property now, which is a little broader than the traditional state definition.
So absent this bank account, it would have gone into the general fund.
I think it probably would have, but I think that's more of a CAO question. That just really gets beyond.
It used to.
Yeah.
That was the standard practice.
Okay, yeah. I don't pay attention to the money or where it goes.
Did you want to offer any?
No, just to the extent that I can provide clarity, but I think Attorney Dagger has done just fine.
Okay. Oh, I was speaking to the...
Oh, the CAO?
Jackie Wagner, CAO. In answer to the question, the regular process, under the regular process, sales, the revenues are split 50-50. 50% goes to the CD's Real Property Trust Fund, and 50% goes to the general fund. Once this ordinance is approved, in the sale of property that are designated for economic development, 50% will continue to go to the Real Property Trust Fund, and the other 50% will go directly to the Economic Development Trust Fund for purposes of, to use the funds as leverage and for economic development purposes.
So absent this, it would have gone into the councilmanic fund.
No, you will. You will still continue to receive 50% under either the regular process or under this Economic Development Trust Fund. 50% always goes to the Council District General Fund, Real Property Trust Fund.
I'm sorry, he was saying something different.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, and what I just told you is correct.
Okay, because this is just setting up the fund. That's what I say, how the money flows out is really...
When the council originally provided the instructions to set up this fund and very thoughtfully created the Economic Workforce Development Department, we wrote a report and recommended that 100% of the sale of property that's designated for economic development be placed in this Economic Development Trust Fund. Since that time, there's been we've had a number of different meetings with the different council offices, and it was determined to have there continue to be a 50-50 split, where the council district would continue to receive 50% of the proceeds in your Real Property Trust Fund, and with a balance, the other 50% going to the trust fund. So at the time that you contemplated creating this fund, you wanted to put 100%. Now you're putting in 50%.
And this applies to like the CRA?
Yes.
CRA properties?
Yes.
Yeah, the CRA properties, I think it's a little different because even in the scenario that we're speaking of now, these are net sales proceeds. In the instance of the CRA properties, there won't be any net sales proceeds. For that matter, the city will own the property for a microsecond, if you will. Right. And for that matter, the city is obligated to provide its consideration for market value to the CRA. So there won't be any net sales proceeds that would inure to the Economic Development Trust Fund or the Real Property Trust Fund of the impacted council district. So that's the exception.
Yeah, with regard to those CRA properties, the proceeds do not come directly to the city except after disbursement by the CRA, and 26% of that, which is approximately 26% or so of the property value, 100% of that goes to the general fund, and that's been the policies, particularly with those 10 future development properties and other CRA properties that we do not own.
Last question, I promise.
I'm going to hold you to this in the next committee meeting.
Proximity, does the funding for this economic have any relationship to where the money was gained? So if you sell the property, 50% goes into this new fund. Does the economic development that's going to be used with that fund have to be in any proximity to where?
So the report contains guidelines on the proposed expenditures, and I'm going to leave that up to Sam to answer.
Sure thing. Thanks, Jackie. The department is mindful of where the monies will come from, particularly if, for example, there was a property that was sold in CD10 and the net sales proceeds that actually inure to the trust fund were to the tune of $200,000 or $300,000, notwithstanding the far-reaching guidelines that will govern the Economic Development Trust Fund. The department is mindful of where those monies came from, and there is tracking of the same. And to the extent that there is a meaningful economic development project in the impacted council district, that is the council district that was the subject of the sale, then we would make every effort to deploy dollars and resources back into the impacted area. But that's not to the exclusion of any other council district whereby there is an economic development project that's ready to go.
Tempted, but I won't ask anything.
Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you. Thank you for your work on this. Two questions. One is, would this process be triggered? So you have a site and you have a project in mind and you have maybe a partnership in mind. Would this process be triggered by a council motion?
the process for.
So if you
For
wanted
the-
to do a real estate transaction
Sure.
regarding a surplus property, would the process be triggered by a council
Well,
motion?
we want to draw that distinction. If it's a surplus property, as you just mentioned.
No, economic, I mean, I'm tempted to say yes, but I don't want to shoot the gun. Again, that's beyond kind of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But,
If
it's
there's
more
a
of CLA
project,
question, I think yes.
if there's a piece of land in a particular council district and the EWDD in consultation with the council office consider, this is a great opportunity for economic development, we sell this property. Well, great. Then EWDD will be engaged via motion or something to move forward in the disposition and development of that site. Part and parcel of what we do is we engage the city attorney to make certain that there are covenants that further obligate the developer to do whatever it is that we're asking. In those instances, clearly it's for economic development, as was earlier mentioned, and then any net sales proceeds would inure half to the real property trust fund of the impacted council district, and the other 50% would go to the economic development trust fund of EWDD. So that's sort of the way in which we're moving. And again, that's net sales proceeds. There are instances whereby the city has other federal obligations. Consider it a mortgage or a lien or other encumbrance on the property. So the net sales proceeds are sort of your take-home pay, if you will. And that's what that issue.
So I think the answer is more or less yes. In consultation with EWDD, you identify a parcel and you initiate by council motion.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
that starts the whole work.
I guess to that point, yeah,
The other
you're right.
question I have is, and I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to ask to make sure. Well, let me reel that in. When we work with a nonprofit or an affordable housing developer for a city surface parking lot to be developed, which we have those projects going and working with EWDD, it's usually a long-term ground lease. Could there be a scenario wherein we declare a surface parking lot surplus and then go in this direction for an economic development project? Can you see that as a scenario?
Blossom Plaza, it was, I think, at one point in time, 20, 30 years ago, you guys declared it surplus. And it never got off the ground. And then
But nothing precludes that, it sounds like, in
Right,
this
then you-
ordinance.
Yeah, you redeclared it economic development, and we entered into a ground lease, and now they've actually built
Right.
a nice place.
I think it might be rare because the long-term ground lease is kind of the template that we've been using. But I was just curious if that could possibly apply and maybe a one-off sort of situation.
It's not to the exclusion of lease, so
Right.
we're in large part talking about sales, but also if there are any net lease payments, if you will, that will inure to the city, half of that could go to this trust fund to further economic development throughout the city of Los Angeles.
I had a couple of questions as well. So what is going to be the effective date of this ordinance, assuming when it gets adopted?
The thought is
30 days after it's published, I think. Again, really, this ordinance, all it really does is it sets up.
Establish a fund.
It opens up a bank
Right,
account
right.
and gives you guys some more powers.
the authority.
And how soon, so then at that point, do we have any properties that are potentially in the queue for this? That by the time we open this, we will have some funds available?
I'm smiling because I very much hope so. But it seems as though things continue to evolve here within the city of Los Angeles. And while I can think of properties that are currently owned by the city that are well positioned for economic development, if this is adopted within the next 2 or 3 months, and hopefully the next week or so, and to Councilman O'Farrell's point, at the appropriate time, we would bring that deal before the council and the mayor to allow us to move forward. But there is some thought and sort of kicking the tires on a few things and sort of running numbers on the back of the envelope just to get a sense about the type of cash flow that can bankroll this trust fund that will really allow the department to be more aggressive and effective as it goes to create, economic development opportunities throughout the city.
I would say Pico and Fig, the parking lot there that we're currently working on trying to develop a hotel deal, and it will actually be sold for money. And unless that money's encumbered in some other way, then I'm assuming the money would go there, and that's probably in the order of, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's in the millions. But that's not a deal yet that's come to council, and it's not. This ordinance will be effective way before that's consummated.
So does the 17-18 budget reflect what would be otherwise, what originally would have gone to the general fund? Is it now reflected in our budget projections, assuming
The
this gets adopted?
17-18 budget, which is where we are right now,
Right.
I can't imagine so because this hasn't been adopted, and CAO could speak more to that, but I would doubt it. I'd be surprised.
Okay.
And even in terms of 18-19, I don't think there was much in the way of any contemplation in that regard. But this is evolving, and it's quite fluid.
Okay. Any other questions, colleagues? You good? Last chance, Bob. Okay. So I'd like to recommend the approval of the ordinance to create the Economic Development Trust Fund and request Budget and Finance Committee to consider any impacts of the ordinance as well.
It's already went through economic development.
I think MFC as well.
Okay. Thank you. Item number 2, please.
Item 2, Department of General Services report and ordinance relative to the non-financial conveyance of 7 easements to the Alameda Corridor Transportation Authority, property located at 2551 and 2649 East Washington Boulevard.
Good morning. This morning, we're here to convey 7 easements on what is called the Alameda Corridor project. The properties are located at 2551 and 2649 Washington Boulevard. We've used these properties for city purposes for the last 20 years, and now we're asking for the authorization, to convey them to the Alameda Corridor for their continued use.
Do you have any questions?
These are just traditional easements,
That's-
run-of-the-mill, off-the-rack easements?
I think you'd call them so, yes.
No? Okay, I don't think we're going to have any questions. Alameda Corridor is doing, it's a very important part of our yeah. So,
No, just kidding.
no.
They've been in use for the last 10 years, and we're
Right.
just officially making them useful for them for eternity.
Okay, great. So I'd like to go ahead and approve the recommendations to adopt and the conveyance of the 7 easements.
So moved.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have we cleared the desk?
You have.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.